Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Shafer, and I do want to put a trigger warning at the top of today's episode. We will be discussing sexual violence, suicidal thoughts, suicide, and other domestic violence and domestic abuse. So be aware that that's covered and make sure that you are taking care of yourself and utilizing resources to make sure that you are safe and cared for. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Shafer, your host of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I am passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story and move forward to build your beautiful future. I am so pleased today to have Robert Uttaro today. Robert is an author of the book To the Survivors. He is a rape crisis counselor and an advocate for victims of sexual violence. Robert, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time and all the work you do to support victims and survivors of sexual violence.
Thank you for having me on your show today. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I want to start off the show with some statistics because this is a really important topic. And I want listeners to understand the magnitude of this issue so that they have a better understanding why you do the work you do and why it's so important for us to have discussions like we're having today. So here are some statistics about sexual violence in the United States. According to the CDC's 2010 National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, 18.3% of women and 1.4% of men have been raped at some point in their lives. And I'm suspicious that those self-reported numbers might also have some cultural impact as well, because the men's number seems quite low. Another statistic there, younger people are at higher risk of sexual violence, with ages 12 to 34 being in the years with the highest risk. And I want our listeners to understand that, even when your child is 12 and you see them as a child, that's really a really high risk age for sexual violence. And we need to be aware of what's going on in their lives and protect them the best that we can. And another statistic found by the Supporting Survivors group was that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 7 boys by the age of 18 will have been victims of some form of sexualized violence. Yeah. How do those numbers resonate with what you experience as a rape crisis counselor in your community?
My first thought is how sad it is that these stats exist, and that, in my experience, it's actually the least reported violent crime. So you have all these people throughout the world that don't even make those statistics. And I actually think the stats might be lower for the first stat. I believe that there's more than 1.4% of the male population who have been sexually traumatized. So we have a very serious problem. We have a problem and crimes that severely alter people's lives and even dictate their lives and control their lives as a result of the pain that someone else causes on them. And it really is a global problem. So these stats are quite interesting. I know there are more stats as well, and I think they're helpful when we discuss these issues. And it's also important to keep in mind that there are so many people that don't make those statistics, and where are they and how are they doing in their lives. And that's part of the work I do. So it resonates, and it's in my experience, a lot of people sadly aren't in it, and that's sad.
Yeah. Well, and it really makes me think, and why I find the work you do to be so inspiring and important. It makes me think of the fact that, as you mentioned, so many people aren't captured by these statistics because of societal expectations of maybe how they behave when they've been victimized, when they've been assaulted, who should take the blame based on maybe what their family has told them or what society has told them. And so they don't get captured by these statistics. And then we don't fully understand the magnitude of the problem. And we need to understand the magnitude of the problem. And we also need people to be able to reach out to someone like yourself for help when this crisis occurred, because as you alluded to, this happened to them
Mm.
not because of them. And they deserve to have help. And that's really what you do in the community.
You mentioned kids as young as 12, and not many people want to actually think of a 12-year-old being sexually violated. Sadly, it happens even younger. And so people, a lot of this is suffering, and a lot of this is actually suffering in isolation, where people are alone. They feel that they're alone, even if they're not alone, but they feel that way, they think that way. And so it's vitally important for us to acknowledge our children and to check in with them. And just if we see a change in their behavior, see if they're struggling, whatever it is, just even check in. How are you doing? Are you okay? What's going on? It doesn't mean they're going to disclose something like a sexual assault, but they could. So it's just vitally important for us, for children and even older adults, to cultivate and create a really, lack of a, not a cliche, but genuinely a safe environment, a safe place and a safe space that they can open up about whatever it is that's afflicting them.
Right. That's so incredibly important. I really appreciate you sharing that. Um, especially for a young person, they really internalize things that happen to them, and just the way that their brains are wired at that point in time, they're very egoistic. So they kind of think everything's their fault.
Hmm.
And it's our role as the safe adults in their life, in my opinion, to provide them different data points and to give them those safe spaces. Because if we don't actively do that, we don't assume that they're fine and that everything's normal, but we don't, we need to actively create safe spaces. We need to actively tell them, I'm here to listen to you, good or bad. I love you no matter what. I'm here for you. Nothing that happens to you is your fault. If we don't create that space for them and things are happening that they're not sharing, those data points, as you mentioned, they kind of form a trajectory that they go on for the rest of their life. They start to make assumptions about what's supposed to happen to them if certain things are happening, and we're not creating safe spaces to combat that and say, no, that's not what you deserve. That's not okay. And I'm here to listen to you and I'm here to support you.
So what you just said made me think of what people think they're supposed to have and supposed to be. There are so many people, young people, that think they're um, supposed to be treated like crap, supposed to be treated like nothing. So all they're good for is to be abused, and this deep level of shame that exists that can play a trajectory in their life, and absolutely plays a role in their choices and who they date and even who they marry. So there's young kids who are being hurt, and if there's no intervention, if there's no ways to get through to them, and that can be in a variety of different ways. It's not even just verbal. Even are we are reading their writing? Are we listening to their music? Are we if these things don't change, and if they don't help, they will can easily become adults with horrific problems. And think about that for a second, of how long the impacts of these crimes can take place.
Yes.
How long? So what you just said really made me think of that. And it's part of the work I do. It's part of the work we do of trying our best to help them understand that. You can imagine it, I very rarely do I see people not blame themselves. So that's actually part of the war. That's part of actually the spiritual war of really trying to get people to understand it's not what they did, but you can understand why kids would think that. And again, even adults think that.
How do you help someone when you're in that position to be there to listen them and support them? How do you help them redirect their focus from shame and blame, which may be a habit that's very deeply ingrained in their thought processes and their mindset? How do you guide them to reframing it to, this is something that happened to you and I'm here to help you heal and you move forward?
It's very difficult, but I listen more than I speak. I truly believe we actually talk more than we listen. So just listening to people and believing them can actually possibly save their life and really change their life. So depending on what comes out in the listening process, then I try to combat it. And that can be a variety of different things. So, and it's not easy, and sometimes it's actually agonizing, and it can take years actually just on one point. just one little point can take years. And I work with people that, like, intellectually in their mind will know something, but they really don't feel it. They don't have it like in their being. So it's trying to get them from the mind and even in their being. So what I do is essentially try to combat the lies with truth. I believe we live in a world of truth and lies. So depending on what the lie is that sexual violence is teaching them and has taught them, that they are ingrained with, combating it with truth and going at it that way, depending on what is coming out.
Mm.
Does that make
That is
sense?
so, it does. And it's so incredibly powerful because, as you mentioned, we are so often in our head and we intellectualize, and that's a coping mechanism, right? We separate ourselves from our body because our body was victimized and brutalized, and something happened to our body that our mind did not consent to. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes to escape that, we escape into our mind and our thoughts and we protect ourselves, but we're still carrying that in our body. And I think that when you help someone come back to their body and really feel that pain, because they may never have done it before. They may have just, nope, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. That is too painful. But if they can, in
Mm-hmm.
a safe space, acknowledge what happened to them, then perhaps they can move forward from it and say, that happened to me, to my body. It wasn't okay, but I'm still me and I get to move forward. I'm not going to give this person who's victimized me control over the rest of my life. I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
coping with this. I'm going to carry this memory with me, but I am not going to give over my life, which I think is something that victims of sexual violence, we struggle with coping with what's occurred to us, in part because it's often never been acknowledged, or we have been, as you mentioned, shamed and blamed for what happened to us. So we just sit with it. And
Mm-hmm.
instead of sitting with almost like the corpse, right? Like you don't want to sit with the corpse, right? You're going to get sick from it. So you kind of like, you move into the attic of the building, but it's still there. You haven't dealt with it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's still making you sick.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest problems is actually how we respond to it, in my experience and opinion. And so if someone comes to you and opens up about really anything, but if something is painful and sensitive and deep as sexual violence, we should be believing and listening and treating them well and not blaming them. And that's part of the work I try and do. And it's not just with survivors and victims. They're just random, just everyday people that are adamant about, well, you really shouldn't have been there and you really shouldn't have done that. And why would you drink? And it's like, why does that mean someone should get raped? I'm not understanding the connection. Okay, that you have no idea the impact of your words and what it's doing to someone that's already traumatized. So stop doing that. Just, it's better to not say anything and just say, I don't know how to help you, than to do that. And what you said, it comes out different ways. There's people in the healing process, people can, it obviously can come out through crying and bawling. It can come out in screaming. It can come out in talking. It comes out in silence. You can just sit with a person for like an hour in silence, and that is actually really helpful for them. So it really varies, and it depends on where they are, even in the process for themselves. But regardless of how they do it, to be able to express it in the way they choose is, again, just vitally important in their healing.
Yeah, and
And it's
sit with
possible.
them. Yeah, it is possible. And as you mentioned, you're sitting with them in that space and allowing them to express it in the way that works for them. And I think kind of leaving yourself out of the equation in that moment and just holding space, not
Hmm.
reaching, you know, I think we feel like sometimes we're reaching in when we offer advisement or we
Hmm.
we offer kind of an ill-informed phrase, a platitude, but really we're reaching back into ourselves instead of reaching forward. Whereas holding that space and just listening and actually admitting, I don't know what to say right now, but I'm here for you, is so
Hmm.
important. And I wanted to highlight something that you've said previously about an acronym that you use,
Hmm.
BLESS, to try to help people who want to support victims and survivors, to help them understand how they can show up in a way that will be supportive and not disconnecting.
Yeah, I mean, we all know people, and we don't know what they're going through, but when we see them in everyday life, we see very successful people, and you have no clue actually how bad they are suffering inside, unless of course you do, right? So I've continued to work with people that I know their deepest and darkest secrets that other people wouldn't believe. They'd be like, there's no way, your husband did that. There's no way this happened to you when you were 6. There's just, I don't believe it. So the BLESS acronym is something that came to me. It's believe. So believing people is vitally important. And some people would say, well, people lie. Well, some people do lie, but that is not even close to the majority of this world and the majority of people who are coming forward with these things. In fact, most people don't come forward with these things, hence the point of the statistics. So believing them is very important. And L is for listen. So to listen and to not really give much advice, unless, of course, it comes up, but to really just sit and listen. The E is empathy. I am not you and you are not me, but I can try my best to put myself in your position. Attempt to think of what someone else is going through. Just attempt, okay? S is support. Safety. So I try to ensure their physical safety, their mental safety, their emotional safety, and their spiritual safety to the best of my abilities. And it's not just me; it's a team. I try to get people to understand that they're not alone. There are resources. Sometimes for myself, they're coming to me, and it's the first person, but that doesn't mean I have all the answers, and it doesn't mean I can help them with everything, depending on what they need. Seek a therapist, seek a counselor, seek a legal advocate if you're considering the criminal justice system, depending on the needs. Seek a pastor if you're questioning issues of faith. And the last one is support, right? So we try our best to support them in any way we can. So I found that to be an easy acronym that people could really accept and learn, that they could hopefully use if someone comes to them with a disclosure.
I think it's a wonderful tool. And I think especially when we are dealing with something that's very emotionally triggering, maybe something we have our own experiences with that we're not comfortable with dealing with or discussing, or we don't have experience with, we know it's really heavy, but we can't relate. So we really need to have advice in a situation like that because maybe we've never done it before. And I think this is just a really helpful acronym. I want to hone in on something that you said that is really, really important to me. One of the things that I discuss with my audience is there's no safety in silence. And when it comes to coping with and moving forward from violence, sexual violence, domestic abuse, it's really important for people to feel safe, because when they don't feel safe, they're in, fight or flight. Their hierarchy needs are not being met. So they can't live the life that they want to live because they're just focused on being safe. So if they're if they're suffering from intimate partner violence in their day in, day out life at home, or if they're being molested by a family member that could be coming into their life any moment, any day, or heaven forbid, a coach at school or a pastor, these situations that we don't want to talk about, they make us so uncomfortable. They make us so sad, but they happen, right? So if we are not doing the work like you're doing and your team is doing, and ERs are doing, and law enforcement is doing, crisis centers are doing to provide safety in that moment or in the following moments after someone has become a victim of sexual violence, if we don't really focus on how to get those resources to people, they can't heal and they can't live productive, happy lives. And as you said earlier, they're going to carry this forward and it will affect their lives. It is not a life sentence. It does not have to be, but we really need people to have resources to deal with it so that they can live their lives and move forward and say, this happened to me and I'm allowed to take care of this. Just like if I broke my leg, I'm allowed to go to the doctor and get a cast.
One of the differences, you see the physical pain of a broken leg, and you don't often see the pain inside. In fact, the broken leg heals, but a lot of people are not healing from the pain inside. And one of the challenges, I agree with you, it's just one of the challenges is so much of this is in secrecy and so much of it is we don't know. So it's very difficult to provide a safe space for someone if we don't know what's happening. If we know and then still don't act, I would argue shame on us, right? I would argue we're just as liable if we are aware of things. But if we're not, it's very difficult. So part of the things of, again, being aware of kids is just being observant, hearing things, seeing things, and even even potentially even moving a student in like a class. If someone has threatened or made a threat, has made a threat against a kid, is it that difficult to simply like move a kid from their class because they've actually been threatened with rape, which I've encountered? So yeah, it's very difficult to talk about. So there are kids and even grown adults that are begging, they're begging for someone to get them out, to be free, but it's also so difficult to do that, especially if their perpetrator is a husband and so many people just love them. They're seen as so charismatic and he's so great. That makes it even more challenging. But you did say something that I work with people, depend they can't heal if you're in an unsafe environment. You will not be able to be okay if you're still with your perpetrator. It just can't happen. So yes, trying to get people away is necessary. It's necessary, but it's challenging when you don't have no idea.
Right. And, unfortunately, along with those cultural expectations and these limiting beliefs that so many people have that are led by shame and blame, that make them really re-victimize themselves in a
Mm-hmm.
way after they've been victimized, because they kind of blame themselves or they
Mm-hmm.
shame themselves for what
Right.
happened. They get stuck in that wheel instead of just kind of squarely saying, no, this was wrong, right? And they get stuck in that. And if you're living with your abuser or they're in your environment, they are reinforcing those beliefs. So
Mm-hmm.
until, like you said, until you're out of that environment, whether or not the actual physical harm is being continually perpetrated, or if it's just this person harmed me one time and now I live in fear and it's affecting my life, I think it's really important that people understand sexual violence in a way that maybe we don't often discuss. There's being raped, and then there's also other forms of sexual violence that happen to people every day that really affect their lives, and they're not okay.
Mm-hmm.
But often, if you're even married to someone and they perpetrate sexual violence to you, depending upon what state you live in or what country you live in, that's really complicated too, because maybe it's not considered a crime
Mm-hmm.
unless you have evidence that you probably wouldn't be able to obtain even if you tried.
Mm-hmm.
So it's such a complicated issue. And so I think, resources like your book are so incredibly important for someone who is a victim and maybe they don't feel safe, rather, to have a conversation with someone, but they just kind of need that first step of feeling a community, of feeling support, of I'm not the only one this has happened to. I am not as isolated as I'm being made to feel. And when you no longer feel isolated, I think that can be emboldening on your journey to reclaiming your life and just seeking a future where you're not being abused anymore.
I can't tell you, back to even the statistics, I cannot tell you how many women I've met in my life that have had some experience with something sexually traumatizing. And it's almost, it's I mean, beyond sad, but it's almost like it's more rare that that doesn't happen in my experience. Or maybe that's just because of the work I do, and once people hear that I do this, sometimes they come forward to me. I don't know what it is, but uh that is it is something that is quite widespread, and they're hurting, and it comes out in random ways too. It can come out, you could be, so sometimes people will say, like, should I tell my spouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And well, maybe, but they're so scared, and they also don't know I know nothing about their spouse, but maybe they could put a little like a plant a seed. So they might bring up like a story in the media and say, hey, did you hear about this article? What do you think of this? And depending on their reaction, that might give you an answer on whether you're going to tell your spouse or not. And I have seen many times that their answers to something like that, it's like, no, it's not time to tell your spouse right now, because it's actually going to hurt you more even though you want to
Mm-hmm.
tell your spouse. Ideally, you should be able to tell your spouse, but it's actually going to do more damage to you right now.
And that's something that you discussed during your talking about the BLESS acronym, and you've discussed on other interviews that you've done about sharing, finding someone to listen to you, but also making sure that they're going to be supportive, because not
Mm-hmm.
everyone can hear your story and can sit with you and not re-victimize you, whether it's intentional or unintentional.
Right? It has an
Yeah.
impact. It has an impact on someone that, again, is traumatized and struggling and might not know what to do or what to say or where to go, and they're just begging for someone to help them. So who you do go to, again, is very important. But if you are treated poorly, if you're not believed, that don't let that keep you isolated for like another 10 years, right? Because there will be someone else that will not do that and will treat you the way you deserve to be treated, with love, respect, and compassion.
Yeah. And from your perspective as a rape crisis counselor, what resources do you want people to understand are available? And your average community, obviously it's going to vary, but
Mm.
what resources do you think people should be aware of?
I think it's important to understand that they exist. Yes, it's a topic that's not often talked about. It also has had media attention. Sexual violence has had media attention, but just knowing that that resources exist, that there are 24-hour hotlines that someone will talk to you. RAIN is a great organization. It's a national network in the United States. So depending on your state and depending on whatever it is that you're going through, to research it, look online. There are counseling centers, there are therapists, there are books. Some people, that's one of the beauties of a book, that you can't sleep at 3 a.m. and you can open a book and connect with someone in it. That's part of the beauty, I think, of the book. There's true stories in my book. So hopefully you will connect with at least one of them if you've experienced these things. So just knowing that these resources, and depending on legal questions, if that's what people are interested in, there are legal advocates, there are lawyers, there are people, there are cops, there are people that really do care and that will do their best to do this. One of the challenges, of course, is there's oftentimes a lack of evidence. So depending on the need, just knowing the resources really do, that they really are out there. You are not alone. You are never alone, even if you feel like it. That would be one of my biggest things, just letting people understand they're not alone and that nothing they've experienced is unspeakable. It's not unspeakable.
Yeah, that's actually a quote that I had heard you say, that I had written down, that I wanted to make sure that we discuss, because I think that is such an incredibly important thing to say. It's so empathic and connecting to really understand, like, this feels like the worst thing that ever happened to you, and it very well may be.
Mm-hmm.
It has happened to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
You are not alone. You can speak it. It may be really difficult, but I think it's important for people to understand, yes, there is a weight of speaking it, but there is a weight of not speaking it,
Mm-hmm.
and just stepping back and maybe just really, instead of just carrying it and saying, I'm going to carry this forever, I'm shaming myself, I'm not moving forward from it because I don't want anyone to know. Really asking the question, well, what is the worst thing that could happen
Mm-hmm.
if in a safe space I share this?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the best thing that could happen? And making a decision in that moment, and it can change over time, about what you want to do with that information, instead of just falling behind shame and saying, I'm never telling anyone this ever happened to me ever.
So I can understand why people don't talk about it, and I can understand why they keep it in. But I pose a question: is it worse than what you've already been through?
Hmm.
Maybe it is, but is it? And so it's scary and it's terrifying. I mean, there's no way I would ever diminish that. It's absolutely terrifying. But is it ultimately worse than what happened to you? And to some people, maybe it is. That's why I posed the question. But
Yeah.
it's heavy. It's really heavy. It's very real. This is a real thing that really impacts every day, people's lives every day. So
Yeah.
there are weights, there are heaviness, but those weights don't have to stay on you, that they actually can come off. And that doesn't mean that you'll be perfect and that everything is awesome all the time. That's not what that means. And one of my struggles with people is they are so hard on themselves, and there's so much shame. And if they get triggered, if they have a nightmare, and if they have something happens in their life, and they feel like they went back so far back in their process because this happened, and I'm glad they reach out. It's better to say it to someone than to keep it inside, because it's like, no, no, you had a setback for a moment in time, but that's actually normal. It's totally normal to be triggered. It's completely normal that this happened to you, but that doesn't mean, and that's one of the special things of counseling, I find, that I can say to someone, well, this is what you were like 2 years ago, and look where you are now. That they might not see that, and they would never think of that, but then to be able to, again, combat the truth and lies, look at what you're doing
Mm,
now, and that's really special. So I'm sorry that happened. The fact you even reached out to speak to someone that you got triggered means you're growing.
exactly. Yeah. I love that you're holding space to reflect that back to them, because most victims and survivors have started in a space of not wanting to share,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. And so the fact that they're reaching out is a sign of growth, exactly
Mm-hmm.
like you said, and
Mm-hmm.
that is enormous. And I think when you do the work to speak your truth, and you work with your nervous system as well, kind of the hard work you do on your own. So once someone has held space for you and acknowledged you, and you're like, okay, this is real, I'm believed, then you start doing the day in, day out work of, okay, how do I cope with triggers? How do I deal with my
Mm-hmm.
nervous system?
Mm-hmm.
And that is incredibly tough work, but actually identifying the triggers is such a huge part of that. And again, you can't start doing that work. I actually called it a trigger detector.
Mm-hmm.
I envision it's like a metal detector, and you're on the beach and you're like beep, 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 beep. And when we get emotionally triggered, we kind of back away, right? We're like, oh, no, run. This is horrible. I am mad and sad, and I'm going to run away from it. But if we are on the beach with a metal detector and it beeps, we're like, oh, that's where we need to dig. That's
Mm-hmm.
where we need to look. And I am really passionate about trying to help people really reclaim what's happened to them and reclaim their emotions and do the digging
Mm-hmm.
and the examination of them rather than run from them.
Mm-hmm.
Because that emotion, that fear and that pain it's telling you something. Your body, your nervous system is telling you something important, and it's going to keep telling you that same message until it's dealt with. Because whether you cognitively consciously understand it, subconsciously your body is saying, no, like this is a problem and it's
Mm-hmm.
causing me pain and I need to cope with it.
Mm-hmm. People either cope with it or not, right?
Yeah.
They either do what you're doing, what you're saying. They either dig into it, or they run away from it, and they continue to, and they choose many different things, and oftentimes negative coping mechanisms, to deal with pain, to deal with suffering at the hands of someone else that they blame themselves for. This is the sick shame and sick cycle and sick pain of these issues. But it does impact their bodies. It does impact people's bodies, and the body's trying to tell you something. Again, back to all the more reason to do it in a safe space where you can trust. Trust is shattered for people. Trust is necessary. Like, I understand it's important not to trust everyone. You shouldn't just
Mm.
trust everyone and trust everything, because that's not in this world. But to never trust will continue to have an impact in one's life. And there are some people in this world that you can trust. And if you can find one, it will just be it'll just be helpful. And it's important to just say that you can do it. It can happen. I wouldn't even be here with you talking if this wasn't real, and that people didn't get better and heal and live very healthy, functional lives. I wouldn't continue doing this, and I wouldn't be actively involved in those weights, in the heaviness of it. You and I wouldn't do this if it wasn't real. So the fact that we're even talking today means, of course, you can heal. Of course, you can grow. And of course, this does not have to cripple and control you.
And I want to highlight something you said, because I think it's so important. It's not only about trusting someone else, but it's also about learning to trust yourself, that you
Mm-hmm.
can speak these things, not even necessarily out loud to someone else. Maybe in a safe space, you journal, or you even just talk to the mirror,
Mm-hmm.
or you listen to music that you resonate with, and you allow yourself to feel those emotions. You basically just sit with yourself, you hear yourself, and you survive that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, okay, I can survive that. What can I didn't know I could. I didn't know I could face this. What can I do next? And what effect is that going to have on my life?
I have seen people that just don't have a clue about the truth of themselves. So when someone, the way they view themselves is just so different than how I view them, as just in a simple example. So what you just said is, and that's part of trying to help them in their healing and in the truth and the lies. If they really believe that they are worthless and dirty and ugly and have no gifts and talents, but then we try to combat them and say, actually, you're this incredible poet, and wow, you're a great chef, and you're so intelligent, and you're an excellent listener. You could be a phenomenal counselor, and wow, music's been so powerful in your life. It's so powerful in my life. That's incredible. And there's all these things that people have within them, but they don't see it. And that's part of the power of counseling, to be able to hopefully help them do it. And then if they can grasp it, these are things they can try in their lives. Get back into playing music, maybe consider yoga, working out, moving the body. One woman comes to my mind. I've said to her multiple times, but the word movement comes to me for this one specific woman. She needs movement in her life. Other people, it's something different, but so it's out there. It really is. It's out there, and we have choices. We have choices to make. We do have gifts in the world. As bad as this world can be, and as horrible as this world can be, there are so many beautiful gifts, and nature is one of them. To connect with nature, to go into nature and realize that not everyone's horrible, not everyone's trying to take something from you, and that there are good people in this world, and you will be fine. You will be fine. We're all going to die one day, but don't take your own life. I'm sorry to go so deep with that, but it's not worth it. Anything, once you're here, anything can be dealt with. We can deal with anything. And it's scary, it's terrifying, it's awful, it's painful, it's agonizing. I don't believe we have words to truly describe it. I don't believe our human words are enough to truly describe it, but we can get through it. And you'll see what you can do in your life. It's quite amazing.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know you have personally sat with so many victims and survivors who are in that really raw phase of either something has just happened to them, or as we've discussed during this discussion, they're really starting to face what happened to them for the first time, even if it happened 30, 40, 50, 60
Mm-hmm.
years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very vulnerable times. And when we're in that vulnerable moment, kind of holding on tight to yourself and who you are, and not holding on too tight to this thing that happened to you. Because you are you. You are not the thing that happened to you. It affects you. You have to learn from it and cope with it. You do. But it is not you.
So you just said it. It's not you. This is what was done to you. It's not who you are. It's not your being. It's not your existence. And you did nothing, literally nothing, to cause it. There's not one thing you did. And I argue with people and debate it, and I'll fight with people all day over that one thing, that there is literally nothing you did to cause someone to violate you. It's not you. Learn who you are. Figure out who you are. Figure out what you're capable of. What's inside of your heart? What is it that you love? What do you want out of this life and in this world? And get it and live a life you want. live a life you choose, live a life of love and peace, because this is not you. It isn't.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing that with our audience. And I just so appreciate that you show up in your work, your book, and your speaking engagements and your programs in the community to make sure that you spread this message, because it is so incredibly important in how people move forward in their lives. I want to make sure that I share with listeners resources with regards to your website and anything else that you would like them to have access to.
My website's robbyuttaro.com. My book, To the Survivors, is actually free on my website. So if anyone is interested, you can have it. And if it's too much for you, stay away from it. Right? Like if it's too scary, it's totally okay. Just know, back to resources, just know that it exists. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. If it doesn't connect, it doesn't connect. And if it does, you have it. So there are just so many resources in the world for you. There are so many things that people can reach out, grab, and have in their life. And it's not just with sexual violence. It's not just violence. It's life's difficult. And people have a ton of different struggles for a bunch of different reasons. So knowing that resources are there, depending on what it is that you're struggling with or what you need, seek it. Seek it, find it, and don't do it alone. Work with someone. Work with someone. There's going to be times you need to be alone, and that's things that you do on your own. But just know that you have people, and again, a team of people around you that can continue to help you in this life.
How do you talk to and help victims who are in a situation where safety is still an ongoing concern? They want to access these resources, but they don't know how to do so safely. They don't know how to download that book because maybe their partner hacks their Kindle reading list. They don't know how to make a phone call because their phone is actually owned by their partner and they monitor them. How can someone who is really, really feeling isolated feel empowered to take steps to move towards safety?
I believe one of the best things we can do is to educate people. And so, are we really talking to teenagers about this? In my experience, we're not. So one of the ways is, and it's different with kids too, because at least, where I live in Massachusetts, we're mandated reporters. So if we learn that a kid is actually, or if we believe they're in danger, we're mandated to report. So that's scary if a kid wants to say something. But so before I even talk to teenagers, I tell them, man, I'm a mandated reporter. And that's a subtle way I try to tell them that if you really don't want the authorities involved and you really don't want anyone else knowing, but you want to tell someone, to understand that, and that there are confidential crisis centers that will talk to you, or like a hotline. So if that makes sense, it varies with age, and even depending, it's the extreme of, I know, or I've known, for example, a woman's being raped by her own husband, and they live with each other. So actually, are you going to stay with him? Are you going to divorce him? Do we have to intervene and get you out now? And I've been involved in that. So it really varies depending on what it is. And also knowing the fact that some people will stay with their perpetrators. They will some people do stay in violent situations. And they also, money is a big part of it, where people don't actually have the finances to possibly get out, or they're dependent upon their spouse. So it does vary, I think, but that's one of the beauties of education and in this interview, because someone could hear it, and then they might now hopefully have learned that, wait, I can contact a crisis center at midnight, that I don't have to tell my parents, that I don't want to tell my parents, but I really just have to get this out to someone. So
that's great. And then also understand that however you can safely gain access to resources that just educate you and provide truth instead of lies to you, to try to help you with those limiting beliefs about what you deserve and who's to blame, and just help you reset your mindset to one that's just very truth oriented. Like, it's okay to just be really factual and say,
Hmm.
this is right and this is wrong, right? I have bodily autonomy. And that's something also we need to be teaching little children, like you talked about education systems, so that we are less likely to be dealing in future generations with what we were describing, right? The abused spouse or the abused partner who doesn't feel like they can leave. They're financially dependent. They don't have the resources to leave. Well, a big part of dealing with that problem is the resources that you and other people provide, but also let's focus our resources on educating kids about what is right or wrong, so we have fewer perpetrators, because people have learned different ways to deal with their urges, to deal with their emotions, to understand right and wrong. And we also have fewer victims, because they make different choices as well when things happen to them, right? They don't necessarily think that they deserve certain things.
Hmm.
Because I really think, when you're a young person who doesn't understand that you don't deserve to be abused and you have already been abused, that belief really gets set in your mind about, that's what I expect to happen to me. So if you were abused as a young child and then as a teenager again, you are assaulted again, that's like, okay, this has happened twice. This is what I expect to happen now. Even if you don't think that in a really obvious way, the back of your mind, you start to think, this is what I deserve. If you haven't been presented with information that tells you otherwise, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter how many times this happens to you. You don't deserve this. This is wrong. But if you haven't been presented with that information, you think that's what you deserve. And then you might marry someone or
Hmm.
become heavily involved with someone who behaves in the same way, because again, you've started to think that's what you deserve. And then your children see you being treated in that way, and then they start to think that that is okay and normal. And the lifelong effects, not just for you but your entire family tree, can be immeasurable. And it all goes back to just educating people about how we should be treated, about bodily autonomy, and protecting them and providing safety and resources when something happens.
There's a lot of fear in this world, and there's a lot of institutions, schools, uh, churches, families, just institutions in general, sports teams that will not engage in this or educate their players or their students or their children, right, or their congregation or whatever it might be. And when it does happen, it's like, oh wow, thanks. We should be. This is great, right? And uh, when you were talking, I was thinking about kids that I was working with. They were making rape jokes, and
Mm.
I asked the principal, I was like, so I do this. I don't know if you guys know this, but like I would love to talk to the kids, teenagers, about rape jokes, and they actually approved it. Now, not everyone approves it, right? So now we can do this. We can engage, and I don't believe some of the kids even really understand like what rape is, and I don't even think they understand the effects of what their jokes are doing. So that's part of the education, to try to say, hey, this is what this is. Do you even know what this is? What do you think this does to people? Right. And so now, how do you think your joke can impact someone? You have no clue what goes on in people's lives. And sure enough, a girl breaks down crying to me after. I can't tell you how many times people will just say thank you. So if we're looking at like a systemic, long term goal of prevention, it has to be, it's deeper than just education, but we have to be we have to be real. You have to be real with human beings and be real with teens. Don't diminish their intelligence. Don't act like they're not important because they're young. And also, many of our kids have experienced horrific things. So to be with them, to talk with them through their issues and their questions. So do I believe that girl will be fine in life? I do. And I don't know, right? Never seen her since. But this is part of the work. And this is what I argue we should be doing for our youth. We have to talk about these crimes, listen to our kids, and depending on and any of their questions, even the questions of a political issue, whatever it could be, what's your question, and let's just discuss it so that it's better for them, so they're more informed. So yeah, to your point, I mean, if people really don't know where to go or how to do it, that's another reason we should be having more conversations, but real conversations, like real trainings. And it doesn't just have to stop at that one time. Right? So it can be, it's been a year, it's been 2 years. Hey, I still have a question. Oh, what is it? And if I don't know, let's figure it out. Let's research it together. Is it that complicated for us? Is it that difficult?
Yeah, I know. It's not difficult in a cognitive sense, but I think in an emotional sense it is, because so many of us, like when we go back to those statistics, so many of us are walking around with trauma that we haven't dealt with, that we haven't acknowledged. And to discuss it almost feels like we're taking this thing that we've hidden in the dark and pushing it out in the light, and we don't want it there, right? No, 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 no. Keep that back here. But I think when you're ready and when you can do it in a safe place and you feel that you want to share and it's your choice, I do think personally that there is some beautiful release, again, when you're ready, in acknowledging yourself and your pain and just releasing it out into the world and not holding on to it anymore.
I enjoy discussing philosophy. I enjoy discussing theology. I enjoy hearing people's points of view, and we will continue to disagree on a variety of different things. What I don't understand on this earth is we all should agree on protecting children. That should not even be a debate. So if your kids are having questions about sex or sexual assault, and our kids are seeing things, so our kids are seeing, especially with technology, they're seeing things. It's all the more reason to engage with them. Some of my students were watching like some of these like disturbing shows that I thought was too much for them, but they're watching anyways. And I just told them, look, I'm not telling your parents, no one's getting in trouble, you're not getting a bad grade, none of that. But you are seeing some things that are impacting you, and I just have to let you know, if any of you want to discuss, reach out. And I think hopefully that alone plays a role in trust and comfort and connection, and just saying like, you really are seeing some things right now. So just if you have any questions, reach out.
Yeah. No, I so appreciate you sharing that, because again, I think when we've been discussing communicating with kids, this entire discussion is really focused on not shaming them and just really hearing them and providing space. Because I think, again, there's this knee-jerk reaction to kind of, if a kid says something to you that you wish they weren't saying, to be like, oh no, don't say that. No, stop that. Instead of just, whew, this is hard for me to hear. I wish for you that you weren't exposed to this, but I acknowledge that you are. These are my concerns, but you are a person who can make your own decisions. So now hopefully at least you're going to make an educated decision. And if you see something you have questions about, I'm here for you. And that is so powerful.
And you said something that made me think, it's not just kids. There are adults, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, elderly people that are struggling with these issues. And it's really easy to put people in a box. And I actually think we do this more and more. It's very simple to diagnose you and medicate you. It's very easy to say you're depressed. It's very easy to say you have anxiety. It's very easy to say you have an eating disorder. That's easy. But there is something inside. There's something going on. And in my experience, I have often found you alluded to it earlier, the past of one's life. And if you can trace it back into something sadly as horrific as something in their childhood, that is a deep connection to the mental health, to the self-harm, to the addictions and other issues. So if we can deal and help and even heal that, I believe, and I've seen massive changes in people's lives.
Robert, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here to talk to me about this. And I so appreciate the work you're doing because, like you just said, it does have a massive impact on people's lives. And as we've discussed, it's about being there in the crisis, in the moment that things happen and having those resources. It's about being there for people in that messy middle where they don't quite know what to do and where to go. And it's also about helping them learn how to cope with things that may have happened decades earlier because it's still affecting their lives. So this is not a short-term easy solution, but it is so incredibly important, and you are doing the really difficult work. And I did want to say and ask you, how do you cope with holding this really difficult space for people consistently?
My deepest strength comes from God and my belief with God and my connections with God and a higher being, a higher purpose for me. So prayer and meditation are vitally important for me, and music. I love music. And I don't always deal with this the best way either, because it does affect me too, but that is nothing compared to what people go through. And honestly, I often just love being with my wife and my stepdaughter and hanging out and just being with family and friends and working with kids. Actually, I love working with children. So as, and I mean, most of my students never have a clue I do this work, but like there's a side of me in this work that I do is so dark, but it's so special to be able to work with kids and to have joy and laugh with children. I believe children actually have the ability to really restore faith and to restore hope and to really see the good in the world. So I definitely have some struggles. I can have nightmares as well, but it's faith, it's music, it's being with good people that treat me well and love me, and also knowing it really is a lifelong calling. Just because something's difficult doesn't mean you don't do it. So what keeps it's even this conversation now is special to me, and it's actually inspirational to me. So it keeps me even more positive, and uh, these are all helpful in my life as well while doing this work. So thank you for this, and I appreciate everything you do and all the things you're doing for people. There's no doubt in my mind you're impacting people and saving lives, even when you don't even know it.
Thank you, Robert. And you've impacted me a lot with this conversation, and I am very grateful to be able to share this discussion with listeners because I know that myself and many people I love have been in positions where they needed to hear this message. They
Mm,
needed to be seen, they needed to be heard. And I think also it's really powerful to have it come from a male figure because for many women, they may not have had a figure that was a man in their life that was
mm.
supportive, that was honest about things that they'd experienced because of the pain that goes along with it. So I think, that's a part of it too, of your advocacy that is really, really powerful and impactful and will really provide just a feeling of safety to people who maybe have really suffered greatly and never felt seen in a space like this. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing and you taking the time to have this discussion with me. It's been a blessing. And I want to remind listeners that you can go to www.robertuttaro.com to get the resources to get the book for free. I downloaded mine from Amazon and it was on sale for 99 cents. So even if you get it, if you prefer Kindle, it was not overwhelmingly expensive. And I
It
really
wasn't that much
enjoyed
money.
reading it.
A
That was
buck?
like,
You?
it was on sale. It was on sale.
No,
I
it's
was
always
so,
that. It's always that. 99
is it
cents.
really?
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah, yeah,
gosh.
yeah, yeah.
That's so generous of you to
No,
make
it's
sure that
not.
people are getting it.
No, no, it's not. This is not about money. It never has been.
Yeah.
It never will be.
Yeah.
I if people want it, they can have it. They can pay $1. They can buy a paperback. I mail free copies, and they can have it on my website for free. So I'm glad that the 99 cents didn't break the budget too much.
No, it didn't at all. It didn't at all.
Yeah.
I was happy to get it, and I wanted to mention to people because some people like their Kindle, that you can get it on Amazon too, and it's a wonderful resource. And as you mentioned in a prior discussion you've had about the book, you do really formulate the book in chapters so that, as you've mentioned today, it's digestible in a sense that you see what you want to see. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to see what you don't want to see. If
Mm-hmm.
you're not ready to read a certain thing, it's the chapters, you formulated it in such a way that you can see what you want to see. And if you're not ready for this chapter, you're not going to see that information.
We have mainly talked about women, but there are men who are being raped. There are little boys who are being sexually
Absolutely.
abused. There are males
Absolutely.
who are amazing and love their significant others and their children and don't want these things to happen.
Yeah.
So you just said it. If you are interested in learning or reading about a story of a man, you could easily just go to the chapter Dawn and check it out. And if you don't want to read that, you don't have to. So thank you for saying that, because I think it's important for people to understand that depending on what you want or what need or curious about, check it out. Just check it out and go there. And if it's something's too much, stay away.
Yeah. Yeah. And have it as a resource because, your relationship to the information can change over time. So,
Mm-hmm.
and what resonates with you and helps you. Absolutely. And I want to make sure our audience understands absolutely male, female, non-binary, whatever you
Mm-hmm.
affiliate with, whatever you feel is, your gender or your lifestyle, you can be victimized, and understand
Mm-hmm.
when people are coming to you, whatever age they are, whatever gender they are, however they relate, they can be a victim too. So just again, try the bless method of showing up for people and just be there. You don't, try. It's really hard because we want to, again, use maybe some platitudes and things, or we want to question, oh gosh, I'm surprised that happened to you. Someone may respond that way because, right, because of their own experiences. But at the end of the day, just be there, just hold space, no labels, just love, just presence, and give that person a safe space to share so that they can continue to do so and continue to heal. Be a safe space for someone.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you to everyone listening to the show. I'm so glad you're here. This was a very difficult show for some people, I imagine. And please make sure that you're taking care of yourself, that you are utilizing resources. Robert's book can be a resource. Other episodes we've done here and rape crisis hotlines can be a resource. However you need to protect yourself and go along your journey, please make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And as Robert said, we want you here. There's never something that we can't recover from. So take care of yourself. We're so glad you're here. And I can't wait to talk to you soon. Take care. And thanks again, Robert.
Thank you.